All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The World Can Wait. If you've been keeping up with us as far as yesterday, then you know that our theme for this week is research. Our last episode was called The Lost Art of Research. And basically, what we're trying to get into is how important it is to know what you're talking about before you talk about it. And with that, I kind of wanted to take it in a slightly different direction today and talk about music and the misconceptions that we have with music, specifically with appropriation. Appropriation is kind of a buzzword in the past few years that gets thrown around a lot, and it's been thrown around so much that its meaning is often misconstrued. And I feel like we call a lot of things appropriation without actually sitting down to think about, you know, is this really appropriation? Is this really something that someone is doing wrong? And a lot of that goes back to research, whether or not we know who we're talking about. If we're going to say someone is appropriating something, how do we know that? Have we looked into that person as an artist? Have we, seen where they've grown up at, what their culture actually is, rather than what we just perceive it is? So I kind of want to take some time with my good friend David Keller, and we've kind of had this conversation before. So I just want to take some time to dig into that. So thank you, David, for being willing to come on and talk to me today.
Anytime, because not to self-promote, but Dom participated in this very conversation. I run a podcast called the Drum Corps Podcast, and we had Dom on. Literally, one of our first episodes was about appropriation of the marching arts. So this is one that, me and Dom have been having back and forth for the past, about a year and a half.
Right.
Especially when we were in college. Him and I started on it. So this is just one that, whenever I get something, I like bouncing off Dom. So thank you so much for coming on. This is going to be fun to get one of these conversations actually recorded for once.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna open this up in a prayer real quick, and we're gonna dig into it. Thank you, God, for this time and this platform and this conversation. Thank you for everyone that's able to come and listen now, who's going to listen later. And I ask that you would just allow people to learn something that they didn't know and be able to apply it to their lives. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. So, kicking things off, in your own words, what exactly is appropriation or cultural appropriation in terms of music?
I think just because you are correct, it oftentimes is used so ironically, liberally, that I'm going to go back to the definition that was used to me, because we're going to get to cancel culture eventually. I actually found it kind of funny, and I give this long-winded explanation to realize that, explain that, the other day I sat there thinking, because someone mentioned that, Christians perfected cancel culture in the 90s and 2000s, which is when I was younger.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go with the definition that I got taught back then of what Christian appropriation was basically carbon copying something without any of the soul or feeling or philosophy behind it. So, for example, this band wasn't trying to do that, but for younger pop punk fans that are in the Christian scene, I got pushed Reliant K really hard because I'm like, oh, they sound like All Time Low or Blink-182, but they have cleaner lyrics. So it's okay, their band's not trying to sound like the other one, but then you got some bands that are like, we're the Christian version of blank. It's like, okay, can you have a Christian version of a black metal band that specifically has themes of death, hell, Satan, and Satanism, which is what black metal is, and can you really be a Christian black metal band? I always made the joke, and this will be my one swear for the evening. There can't really be a Christian punk band because Christians can't be, and I hope I get this word right, Christians cannot be true disenfranchised establishmentarianism, which basically is anarchy, because Christians, we believe in order. The Bible says we have to give to Caesar what Caesar, and we can't really say the F word. The fact that I say the F word means we can't be a true punk band like the Sex Pistols. So it's basically, in the Christian mindset with music, it's carbon copy and putting something else, where the cultural implications of stuff like that, it's borrowing from another culture, and then just kind of taking what they did without any consideration to what that culture has. And just, you know, so for example, it's really complicated to talk about in things like, is culture appropriation just adding like a hip hop beat on top of a rock song? Is it a country song that's got a rap verse in it or stuff like that? So yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at for those things.
Yeah.
Sorry, my wife just got home from work, so that's why.
Oh no, yeah, she's fine. She's fine. Tell her I said what's up.
So I think appropriation, it's kind of complicated because like there's like religious appropriation, there is like spiritual appropriation. There's other things like it's for some stuff like it'd be the same as using like the Islamic call of prayer. And like if I did a marching show and I wanted to do it about Mecca and I did the call of prayer, the culture of Islam does not consider that music. I know you remember because I think we did the same at the musicology class. And so if I played that and called that music in a show or on an album or something, that's appropriation. That I took something very sacred to them and honestly bastardize it. So I really think the best definition of something is, I'm not going to say stealing, because I know we kind of get in the whole like colonizer versus the slave conversation, and that's where I think it gets misunderstood of like it's borrowing without thinking about what you're actually doing, if that makes any sense.
That's an interesting definition, yeah. And
or a really cheap copy, and in some cases it's a note for note copy, so it's like it's not even original.
And then that's a good thing that you brought up about, prayers not being considered music. And I think that goes back to researching as well, because that's not something I had ever heard. You hear a lot of things from other cultures and they sound musical. Like it sounds musical. So to hear that, no, we do not consider this music.
Yeah,
I think
sacred.
that's heavy
It's
as far as I need to look into something before I actually do anything with it at all. You know what I'm saying?
Funny thing enough, Christian culture used to be that way. A lot of you and I were in the same music history class.
Yeah,
remember when
yeah.
Dr. Hugo was talking about the chants. One of the reasons the Catholic Church, defining feature that the Catholic Church had. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was speaking. The Catholic Church had that the Protestant Church did. So when the Protestant Church broke off with Martin Luther, they made their music very simple. They made it in common vernacular because they believe music and the Bible is for the masses. While the Catholic Church believed that music to God was so sacred that only a select few could participate. So that's why they did their stuff in Latin, because it was a holy reverence. Yeah, there is some hoity-toity and some classism there, which we can now put through today's lens. But like a lot of those monks really believed that like music was not meant for entertainment. Music was meant for teaching. It was meant for worship and like nothing else. And so I think it'd be very interesting, as we say, Christian is a big proponent of appropriation nowadays, what some of the pillars of our faith from like Saint Francis and stuff like that would think of. Like we have Christian radio, we have like I could play Hillsong or David Crowder, like there is a song by Cutlass from their worship album was played on Scrubs. Like a straight up worship song to God was played on a show called Scrubs, which I love Scrubs. But it very much felt out of place that I'm like, I'm having a worship moment in a show that like has a guy called the Todd who gives a high five every time he makes a sex joke. I'm not sure if this is sacrilegious, but yeah, the music works. So like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so, like,
yeah.
Even like my approach to some might be considered sacrilegious. So it's a very in-depth conversation. And I am taking this currently, I know as we're going to go into more of the conversation, like the cultural route, I'm taking it more from the spiritual side. Just because that was my relationship with it. I was always trying to start at Liberty like a Christian metal band, which was like, what are you going to sound like? It's like, well, we're going to sound like, like I really like Red Jumpsuit Apparatus or Seos, and it's like, oh, we'll sound like a Christian version of that. And it's like, all right, so I'm just going to play these music with just Christian lyrics. Ooh, I'm so original. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm a cover band that just happened to change the lyrics. I'm that old band called the Apologetics, where I'm not doing anything, like my stamp isn't on it. Someone else already did the work.
So we talked a little bit, not a little bit. I feel like me and you've talked.
a couple times.
Yeah. But as far as appropriation goes, what do you consider appropriation in terms of like let's say Elvis because we've talked about Elvis before and how we understand that rock and roll was originally a black art form, but then the big thing that everyone says now is, okay, Elvis stole rock and roll, he appropriated rock and roll, and that's why you guys call him the king of rock, but he actually took it from us. But me and you talking about this have come to an understanding that, okay, that is the big headline. However, let's look at how and where Elvis grew up.
Yeah.
So if Elvis has grown up in the same trailblazers for rock and roll, is it truly appropriation in that sense for him to go and take it for himself? He was the guy that blew up for, and we can talk forever about all the different reasons and things at
Yeah.
play that he got famous rather than these black artists. But can we call something like that truly appropriation?
For the record, I'm gonna like my phone because I'm trying to remember the artist because I am Dom and I've also talked. I think we'll say we're not Elvis fans, but like the big ones. So we are talking as outside. Um, I think it's complicated because at least what little research I did, and this conversation Dom and I had because there's a video we shared about like is spoken word appropriating rap, and Elvis got mentioned because like an article I just found on that was just double checking like on the Elvis website basically described him as an encyclopedia of pop music. Elvis grew up in an area where blues and jazz was heard, so he grew up on guys like Fats Domino and stuff like that. Um, so you have a kid that really likes blues because, like, let's be honest here, you're not going to start a new genre of music even if you don't like it. Like you're not going to do that if you aren't into it. And but then like the complicated thing comes in. It's like he also did at times like take some charts from other things, especially from gospel. Because I'm blanking on my gospel history, but I know there wasn't a true like white gospel quite yet. Gospel was just mostly still from the black community at the time, which he heavily borrowed from. Um, which is the emotional side of music, the more spiritual sides and stuff like that, which you see in rock and roll. Um, so it's kind of complicated to just point the finger because like you can very much listen to like guitarists at the time, especially black female guitarists that were rocking the blues scene and see Elvis doing the same thing. It's like, oh, Elvis made money. These women and musicians didn't, so he must be appropriating. It's like, okay, that to me, just like, I don't want to say like as a white man, but it's kind of complicated time. It's like, all right, is the more successful one truly appropriating, even if he's not from the same race? Because like from what I've looked into it seems like Elvis just was a fan of the blues, and the blues combined with gospel, combined with rockabilly, um, got something out there. But at the same time, it's like, but there was a lot of artists that he definitely stepped over to get to be where he was. Um, and it's a complicated thing.
And
Um,
that's kind of what I was like getting to as far as I said, there are other factors and things.
because
I
like
don't want
it's
to
definitely
jump
from the
too
record.
far ahead, but like
Yeah,
talking about record labels and
yeah.
and
Because from a
managers and
business
things
side
like
of
that.
view, definitely. Because it's one of those. I remember hearing like it's kind of funny because then on the flip side, record labels is so complicated because like to go fast forward to the 80s, no one was playing black artists except Michael Jackson on MTV. And then like, you know, they would play like, oh, here's our black artist of the day. And it's like it's Michael Jackson's Thriller again. So then you have David Bowie and stuff like that. And so then it's like, oh, black music, is that a calculated risk or is like, so I feel like sometimes it's like, all right, we're exposing our people to more audience. And then you can very easily say like, oh, they're doing it for money. But like, when most of the CEOs are white at the time and they're trying to break the floodgates, like David Bowie was notorious for like asking in interviews. I remember there was one I got shared. I think it was like Now This or something. He's like, why is MTV not playing black artists? And like he made a record exec like flirt around with it. He's just like, well, people don't want to listen to it. They were always like, yeah, but there's like so many great musicians. Why is it only white? And so then it's, because then the same thing can be said to me. Like I've worked at a predominantly like as a drumline instructor at the high schools I teach at. I actually went back. I'm teaching my first black students for the first time since 2016 in drumline and in the marching arts. Have I been appropriating by just saying, hey, Kanye West has a new album out. It's gospel. You guys like Christian music. Go check this out. It's really solid. Or a drum set player. Hey, go look up Tony Royster Jr., go look up some Jay-Z, stuff like that. So I think it's one of those, it's hard. And I came to this to play devil's advocate of like, what is appropriation, what isn't, because sometimes you have people like what I believe to be Elvis, and I could be proven very wrong by this, that just enjoyed the music. And then someone happened to be the one to make them famous, compared to other situations where like, they're just borrowing, or like, if Kanye West, who's a big into sampling, if Kanye West tossed the Islamic call of prayer in his music, that would straight up be like, okay, now we're appropriating because you have no idea what you're touching. And so it's one of those, because the music industry is just something that you and I have also talked about how much we just hate. It's stupid. There's money involved. It's all about politics beyond what color your skin is. It's just like who you know and stuff like that. Or like, it's complicated to me to say like where it shows up in the music we listen to, because there's a difference between a black gospel and a white gospel beat. And as a drum set player, I know the difference. And the intention is like, if I said like I'm gonna black this section up, that's both racist and appropriation, because I'm doing something. But like if I'm playing You Are Good in church, and the white church I go to, the musicians I feel comfortable to start playing a true like double time beat for the bridge, like am I appropriating just because that's the way a lot of people play it that I like and I respect that? Or am I just playing the music on a chart that happens to be from another style of music?
Well, that's the thing, and I think when you say it's really complicated, back to Elvis and comparing it to what you just said, could Elvis sit here and say, okay, I grew up around this, I really like this, am I appropriating it just because executive over here sees my white face, knows that it's more marketable, and he can put it in front of a bunch of people, and then he can make money, and then I can get some of that money? Am I appropriating, or is he appropriating? Like it is definitely
Yeah.
complicated, but I think you said something really profound. You have to know what you're touching. If you don't even know what you're touching, and then you do something completely inconsiderate, like putting a prayer in your song that's not supposed to be considered music, I think that's where a big problem comes in. Um, but we do this whole appropriation thing a lot with a lot of artists that really don't even fall at, as far as not knowing what they're touching. I remember a few years ago, actually even this year, like it hasn't even stopped. Bruno Mars is
Yeah.
almost constantly attacked for culture, for appropriating black music. But every time he gets a chance to defend himself, he's always talking about his raised around black music, how
Yeah.
he has been immersed in this, and how he supports black people and black artists in general. Yet it's almost like when we see a face that doesn't exactly look black or isn't black, we automatically throw that cultural appropriation out there
And the same
instantly.
can be said for like Ariana Grande as well. Because when I was, uh, I'm one of those people, I like looking at this to be like, because I had someone call me out on my podcast before, when we were talking, getting ready for Black Lives Matter. I didn't realize one of my teaching styles was just straight up racist, because I really enjoyed being like, hey, this is a black culture thing. This is from them. And as a percussionist, I'm like, percussion doesn't come from white culture, it doesn't come from Europe, it comes from Africa. And I didn't realize the verbiage I was using was racist. And I need to thank my friend Sophia for like just calling me out and being like, "Hey, idiot white boy, you can't talk about people like that." I'm like, "You're right." And so I've been digging into this for a while. And one of the things that like mentioned about Ariana Grande is like when she was on Nickelodeon, she was like lighter skinned, and now she's playing more R&B type stuff. She wears darker makeup more consistently. Um, I never watched her Nickelodeon, so someone put like a side by side of her from like the year before she broke out, and it's like, okay, now like is appropriating, like changing, like kind of like with Bruno Mars. The thing is like because he's half Filipino, and so he's kind of that like he looks mixed, and so it's kind of like those. If I don't know what the mix is, I can just assume he's black, and then oh, he's playing just music from his own culture, but like technically he's he's Filipino, I believe, Latin American, if correct, and so like you got times like that where you're correct, the artist, where we have to ask, is it true appropriation if they're playing music they like, you know, like that's to me is where it gets really funky because like I am writing an album that's a metal album right now, and I know I talk with you a lot. I was writing a lot of this when I was really into like Hamilton, listening to a lot of I just had exited my Kanye phase and was kind of moving into some of the other stuff. I was like some like 90s hip hop that a couple of friends of mine are sending, as well as like I was listening to a lot of R&B at the time. So there's a couple specific parts of the album that I've been writing that like I'm not rhyming in a typical rap fashion, but like you can definitely tell I was listening to some faster hip hop at the time because of like the timbre. It's like da 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 da, or da 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 da, or like some of my vocal patterns were like I listened to it and then I thought, oh, this kind of sounds cool, and I just kind of put it there. Or like rather than syncopated rhythms, very syllabic style writing, which and it's one of those. And trust me, I'm as white as it can get, so there's no hiding behind any skin tone thing or misconception. I got really curly Jewish hair and a big old nose, so when people see me, if I started like just writing like rap music and stuff like that, it's gonna be like, oh, that dude is clearly this, but it's like I don't know. I think this is one of those awkward moral high ground conversations that I'm not a huge fan of having. I like having more of the like, why are we talking about it past maybe, and like I said, maybe because it's not my culture that is often on the pedestal of is this being stolen or not, that it's really hard for me to say yes or no, just because like I don't want that thrown on me personally, like just because I enjoy it. And I want to pay homage to the people I'm listening to and writing towards, if that makes any sense.
I'm gonna jump to that topic because you're touching on it now. I think we might as well appropriation versus influence. Because what you just said, at least to me, does not sound like any sort of appropriation. I've been listening to 90s rap. I've been listening to a lot of R&B. This is what I've been consuming. When I started writing my metal album, this is what came out in my vocals. That to me tells me that you've been influenced by what you were listening to, rather than taking the culture of what you were listening to, kind of throwing it on like a suit, and then parading around with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
So that's
do you kind of how do you feel about that? As far as where do you think is there a line, or where do you think the line is between being influenced by something and then actually appropriating it, just kind of based on your definition of appropriation?
I think it might honestly it might just come down to money is what I'm thinking about it, because I know like I'm gonna have this in two parts. One more of a pop music type thing. I am not this album I'm writing is gonna be for like nobody but myself and like probably my mom. And I understand that. Like I've been trying to get some people to listen to it. The folks I share it with are like, this is fantastic stuff. And then I never share it with their friends. So I'm like, is this good or is this bad? So like I know for me, when I'm writing something, it's a passion project. Um, that like I'm just putting into what I enjoy. I wrote an EDM type dance groove at the end of it, even though I kind of don't like EDM music, but I really I'm a I went to Liberty in the early 2010s. Dubstep was everywhere. So I put like a little dubstep thing in one of my songs just because like metal also was heavily influenced by dubstep with like Attack and stuff like that. Um, but like, so again, that's just to me, but then like I go bigger stuff and you've got, you know, very, very country artists rapping.
Yeah.
Like especially nowadays, post Taylor Swift, like we can talk country and how that is very interesting. Where again, I don't want to look at an artist who puts a rap layer in there or like has a vocal rap style breakdown in their thing instead of like, oh, they're appropriating. But like it's very odd, like the fan base and the artists when they have like no indication of it's coming. Because then I have to ask myself, you know, like one of the coolest things I liked about a band called Asking Alexandria was they're from Britain, which has a really big EDM scene. And for those who don't know, it's electronic dance music. So things like house stuff, like Dead Mouse, not really Skrillex, but like Knife Party. So it's not necessarily the wubs or whatever, but it's like that drum and bass you hear in like every movie of like a European nightclub. That's really big over in Europe. And like they also be playing something really heavy in metalcore and then jump into like a giant EDM section. No one ever accused them of anything other than being a bunch of douchebags because they are. But like they just enjoyed it, and you know what? They made it work. But then you have, which was like complete, because like metal and like hip hop don't really mix a lot, and so they're other ends of the world. And so like there was a time when the genres were kind of together, and then you have, you know, country and hip hop, two that historically have been on opposite sides of the tracks, both in regards to racist sentiments towards each other and just cultural. What happens, you know, if they actually blend? Like, because there was, I'm blanking on his name. There was like that one dude's like, "Hi, I'm the black country singer." That's like that was like his marketing tool, and so like, you know, but then you have questions of like, is he kind of like a Candace Owens? Like, does he become the justification of, oh no, not all country music is racist. We have a black guy that sings. And we go back to, can you have a black friend and be racist? It's like, it's really hard to actually tell what's true appropriation and what's not, and what's influenced, because I gotta be honest, and especially now, like we have access to all sorts of music we've never had access to before as musicians. And stealing other people's music was considered the way to write back then. Like in the time of Bach and Beethoven,
Yeah.
and even like and before Bach, there was a style of mass called the Cantus Firmus Mass that is specifically another mass's music with the text changed. Like that's exactly what, no, another mass's text put on different music, or vice versa. So literally you hear something that you like and you would note for note copy it. One of the reasons that they always say Bach wasn't the most original artist and that Bach wasn't very good at writing Baroque, he perfected it because Bach heard a lot of different music, and then like because he was from Germany, and then he wrote in the French and Italian style, and he perfected the French and Italian style. So an Austrian German guy went to another country and wrote their music better than anybody else. And Mozart was the same way, because Mozart was traveling Europe since he was 6. So why don't we say that Mozart, when he wrote the piece "Lick My Ass," real piece by him, by the way, which was influenced by a couple different cultures, why aren't we saying that Mozart's appropriating when he was taking it from another white people group? But then like, if my church, which I don't really have a church right now, and let's say I went to predominantly white church and we decided to have a hip hop Sunday, why would it be that when all of a sudden my church, which I could have someone that just grew up like in hip hop and wants to lead a worship service that way, why is it that now when I as a white man am influenced by something, I have that thrown on me, when like, as you said, my intentions are good? And the frustrating thing to me is like when we can't kind of explain it, when it's just like, oh, you're appropriating stealing, you can't do that. But it's like, well, I've been listening to this since I was 5. It's like, oh, you can't touch that, you're not allowed to. In some cases, if I'm touching it the wrong way, please stop me. And I think that's important for everybody. But I think that just that influence versus appropriation is just, it's such a slippery slope to just assume what's going on in someone's head. Because like,
I think a lot of it is
yeah,
optics too, because like you said, when
yeah,
if you have a predominantly white church Sunday and Black History Month is playing all gospel music, but when you look out, it's a sea of white people. That's an optics thing, and
yeah,
I think it's also like an experience thing of okay, maybe I know this church and I know this people and I know that they made no strides to get black people in their churches, then something like that, looking at it from the outside, that would certainly look like appropriation. But then I think there's also a factor of, like you said, what if I'm the worship director? What if higher life and I want to do this because I love it? It I
yeah,
think the thing we keep coming back to all night long is it's complicated.
yeah. Because actually, like one of the I actually had, because I was gonna say there's a third scenario of that, and one it's just admitting a lack of exposure. I grew up listening to like Michael W. Smith, Chris Tomlin, and stuff till I was 13. And then I found within the same month Reliant K, Under Oath, and August Burns Red, and jumped down the metal train, and just like listened to rock and metal, and it's been nonstop since. I used to think pop and rap. I used to be from that rap isn't music crowd.
Mm.
Um, but I had two conversations with myself that made me realize how dumb I was and how ignorant I was being toward my music. Because I've admitted to Dom, like I didn't realize how racist I was, and the music I listened to helped me because I play drum set, and I teach this line because I believe this line that if you play drum set and you're racist, you're stupid. I literally sat there looking back at the history of the drum set when I went to a camp up in the Berklee College of Music in Boston, and they broke down how the drum set was invented, which was it was a bunch of black artists from New Orleans when they're inventing jazz could not afford a percussion section. So one dude would be paid to play all these instruments, and then that turned into the drum set, which turned into all these things. And it's why a lot of more, I guess we'll call it like the black music genres of like R&B, hip hop, rap, soul, disco are kind of more groove oriented than melody oriented, like some of the European styles, because the drum and the rhythm comes from Africa. And I remember sitting there and I got back home when I was 16 and I was looking at the artists listening to, and I went, there's not a single black drum set player I actually listen to. On top of that, I'm from New Orleans and I wasn't listening to any jazz. The only jazz I had was my mom would play something with like Louis Armstrong was like all I knew and all I liked. And so I challenged myself. It's like, all right, David, you have to listen to more black artists. And so I found hip hop because I found it through the drums. So if I all of a sudden went from like, I mean, I know a guy named Luke Holland on YouTube. He gets this crap all the time because he grew up playing metal. He's in a band called The Word Alive. He's all posting these like rap remixes of like lyrics and stuff like that, where he played drum set groups over like hip hop songs. And he did a K-pop song the other day. Like, that's cultural appropriation. You can't play that song. He's like, dude, I've listened to K-pop since I was 10. And so he's one that's always been a fan. I technically in my life recently became a fan because I play an instrument that's not from Europe, and I am like culturally from Europe. I need to not listen to music that comes from that European stream because like I'm not gonna get it. If I go listen to classical music, there's not a lot of percussion in it. If I listen to like indie folk, the drums are like boom, clap, boom, clap. And that's like not going to make me a better musician. I got to listen to guys like Tony Royster Jr. who play with Jay-Z. I got to listen to Aaron Spears who plays with Usher. I got to know the drum set guys from that gospel chops community that are like going to make me better just by listening to them. And that was a real conviction on me that when I sat there and like we said, like that worship pastor, what if one day you realize it's kind of like what a lot of our band directors are featuring, where it's like, I'm not playing anything by black artists, and I'm not playing anything from any other genre other than contemporary Christian, particularly white contemporary Christian. A lot of times we kind of say there's the guilty white man. We're like, okay, So if all of a sudden they played a gospel song, oh, this is just to get a blacker audience. It's like, or maybe it's to expose the audience I have to different stuff because that's like would be my job. And I think, and again, that goes back to intention. Like I got to be honest, I didn't really like hip hop until like you kind of started showing me some stuff when I was like 23. But I was listening to it since I was 16 because I made myself listen to it because I'm like, I don't like this. This is not my thing. I have no idea what they're saying. And I listen to metal, but like, I've got to learn to respect this and I've got to learn to enjoy this because this is music that my instrument is built around. So I think that's why this conversation is easy for me to understand because like I always just go back to how I feel when I'm playing drums on it. And hip hop is so much more fun to play than rock, to the point that like I actually kind of stopped being a metal drummer a couple years ago and consider myself more of just a groove based drummer, based off guys like Steve Jordan, who played a lot with John Mayer. He was on the late, I think it was on the Late Show, which is just like real pocket grooves, playing the stuff like Kanye West. It's a really some really fun stuff to play. Beyonce is super fun to play too. Like Love on Top is one of like the coolest drum songs ever. But you asked me 10 years ago, and it's like, I got to play as fast, as loud as possible. And I'm like, I'm going to find a 4/4 groove and I'm not going to leave for 5 minutes. Kind of like a drum machine, which was a lot of the black artists in the 80s and 90s were using drum machines. Because ironically, I find it funny that like a lot of those black musicians it came down to, we couldn't afford it. And then we made the greatest song ever. Because like we couldn't afford live musicians. So we did it all electronic, blew the scene up. And now everything is based off those. Jazz was literally made for the drum set because they couldn't afford two guys. Two dudes could not get paid enough, so they had to pay one dude to invent a whole instrument. And now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. Back alleys of freaking Indonesia have drum sets in them. And that's like where I don't know. And it's just interesting to me how all that works. And again, because I'm white, sometimes I'll get that, oh, you're appropriating that because you're thinking this or you're from this culture and stuff like that. It's like, I play drum set. If I don't have these conversations, I'm being racist. So I'm learning up on it. And that's why this is such a big passion to me because I teach percussion, I teach drumline to a lot of predominantly white areas, which is just where I live and work. And if I don't expose my kids to other genres of music, I'm actually I'm not being a very good music educator. I'm being a very poor one.
Yeah. Um, and it's so good that you've been able to take the time to look within yourself. This is what I need to do to advance, but also to understand. And I think that that goes back to this whole idea of, if I look at you and say you're appropriating this music when all you're trying to do is understand it, that tells me that I haven't looked into it to you enough. I haven't had enough conversations with you, haven't followed your path and what you're doing and what you're trying to do. Kind of throwing this word out there. And I will say this because as far as black music goes, when we talk about appropriation, our music is so tied and interwoven into our culture that I feel like for us, it's so easy to look at someone who's not us and say that they're stealing because the culture and the music go hand in hand, So if I can look at you and say, okay, you're playing our music, you're you're making money off of our music, but you've not shown at all that you're willing to do anything for our community. Just off of my one perception of you, it's so easy for us to say you're appropriating, but we don't necessarily know. Like you just said, it could be, look, I was wrong about this for my whole life, and I'm trying to change that, and so I'm or
Yeah.
I've liked this all my life, and I've never had an opportunity to put that out because of where I'm at, but now I have those things. I wouldn't consider either one of those things an appropriate,
Which is
even
funny
though
because
on the outside I can't see all the stuff. You know what I'm saying?
which is funny because like there's actually some moments in music history which I kind of, for the audience, I hope you understand I'm not a big fan of appropriation, and because this the times tend to be a white versus black culture type conversation. I tried to find some devil's advocate arguments for it because like and the top three that I thought of, and I just thought of another one now of similar times where it's like, imagine if like a white dude wrote Hamilton. Like, would we think that's okay? Which is funny because Lin-Manuel Miranda is Puerto Rican. So he's kind of in that like same conversation as Bruno Mars, where it's like, yes, but then he goes there. It's like he's always going to say like it's particularly a blended cast. So like, and if I wanted to do it, I know you could say like I as a white man, my culture's experienced so much greatness, but it's like I personally have it. So what if I like Broadway and like one of my favorite characters from the show is I really like Angelica, like mostly because her raps, like her song is like awesome. And I really like her motif throughout the show. And it's like, if they say they're going to be like open-minded stuff, like what if I wanted to do that, which is a character that's been historically, she's mostly been portrayed by Black actresses, if I remember correctly from the stuff on Broadway. What if I wanted to do that? It's like, oh, it's a dude playing a girl. That could be one thing, but it's like, but I'm white. So it's like, we're talking about this whole giant blended thing. And I think sometimes appropriation actually has that reverse side of it. It's like, we only want, which is I think where the money side comes in. It's like we only really want cultural diversity when it's coming from someone who's not white, which is funny because the situation like that where I thought they would particularly do it is the movie Black Panther, where the guy that wrote Redbone and the guy that made the music for Black Panther is a white guy, and he's also the guy that did the music for The Mandalorian. And I'm blanking on his name. I'm trying to find it right now. And like, he's the kind of a guy that's been allowed to be in conversations and, all these things where, Black Panther prided itself on being a Black cast, Black director, Black EP, Black all these other things. But the guy writing the music, his name is Joseph Day. He's a white dude, long white hair, pasty white. But like, one of the things he did was he went to Africa to study the music. And so like, if I was ignorant to the fact of how knowledgeable he was and the fact that like he picked particular instruments from certain tribes in Africa, like T'Challa is drums, T'Challa is the African rhythm, Killmonger is the hip hop from Oakland and stuff like that, and how like those two themes are interwoven, that's just a giant respect for it. Which then is funny because one of the greatest musical thievery moments in history is Jimi Hendrix stealing all along the Watchtower from not Johnny Cash, not James Dean, Jimi Hendrix stole all along the Watchtower. Which was originally written by, I'm blanking on his name as well, which I'll apologize for blanking the names. I have my second COVID shot yesterday. And so my brain is like mush. And so all these music facts I've been pushed out because of that. He stole it from Bob Dylan. Like
Someone just put it in the comments. Yeah.
Yeah. It's they stole it from Bob Dylan. And by stole it from Bob Dylan, I mean like he played it by Bob Dylan. He tuned it from 155 to 120, changed the key to something more bluesy. So he turned a folk song, made it blues. And for the record, Hendrix was notorious for that. There's another time he literally went to a club with such a good musician, he heard another band play something and then made it their next hit single. Like, so we're talking all the time about like other musicians would steal stuff and borrow something, but like, which is kind of funny because then you go within like the rock and roll scene, the hip hop scene, borrowing and stealing is what these musicians do. Like, it's what I do as a musician. I will just be pretty transparent here. I got a single I just put out called Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively Go to Marriage Counseling. The exact melody line from the first verse is almost note for note the bridge from Under Oath's I've got 10 friends in a crowbar that saying you can't do jack. Like, I was trying to find other stuff, and then I listened to that song when I was writing it, and I really liked that melody line. So I tweaked it, added a harmony to make it something different. But like, I straight up just took something I liked and put it over something I had. But I won't get called appropriation because I took and stole from a white artist. But if I did that for like, if I borrowed something from like Kendrick Lamar, that gets thrown my way. And for the record, I don't want to claim poor white guy, oh, I can't do this and do that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that conversation does happen. And I'll end with this example where, like, at times the ignorance of not knowing the influence or the background of the artist. I work for a Hispanic band director now. And the only reason I say that is a couple years ago, they did a show called Dia de los Muertos. So they did a Day of the Dead show. And they're in North Carolina. And literally they're like presenting their show, Dia de los Muertos. And a kid yelled, "That's cultural appropriation. You can't do that." Directed by Mario Ruiz. Never mind. It's like, okay, the band director's Hispanic, so now we can do a Hispanic show.
See,
Like,
and that's extra. That's what I'm talking about as far as over the top goes. Even if it wasn't a Hispanic director, that's still looking from
yeah,
the outside in, not knowing anything about what's going. You doing a Civil War, or no, it wasn't Civil War,
civil rights, civil rights.
Civil rights show, and
One of
how
my kids is
stressful it
actually
was for
the
you
Facebook
because
right
you
now.
wanted to make sure it was done correctly. So someone from the outside maybe coming in and seeing that you're directing the show, you being white, and saying, "How dare he?" I would hope that wouldn't be the case, but that would be the case sometimes.
Yeah.
So someone
We
saying, "How
actually,
dare he do this?" without knowing the amount of effort you put in to make sure it was done right. And I'll say as well, when I first found out about Hamilton and I saw that it was Lin did it, I was like, just off the jump, who is this guy to do a hip hop Broadway show? Like what I listened to an interview with him. I want to say it was on No Jumper. It might have been on something else, but he just sat there for this entire interview talking about rap music that he grew up on, that he knew, that he loved, writing whole verses and songs from like 15 different artists from the 90s, talking about their best songs, best albums, like the best, what flow he liked. And in that moment, I felt so stupid because I was like, I was so mad at this guy for not being black and taking this black culture. Little did I know that he knows more than I do probably about this culture that I'm sitting here accusing him of stealing. And so I really think that we, as like as the general public, like we have to take the time to really make sure we're informed. Live in such a time where that word can like pretty much destroy somebody's career. You know,
Yeah.
calling
And
them
I
out
think
for
actually, like,
appropriation.
I think actually, like, maybe we can like leave with an actual example of what it is. Um, there is an SNL skit which I shared with Dom. It's got Pete Davidson. I can't remember the guest, but it's got Questlove and some other folks. And it's the you've probably seen it a lot. It's like when Pete Davidson, it's like skate, skate, skirt, skirt, like shut that. And I think it's interesting because like it's a really fascinating one because the skit takes place on like a hip hop show. I can't remember they've done that panel a couple times. It's got Questlove, drummer from the Roots, and another artist who I'm blanking. I've only watched the skit once, but it was one of those like funniest thing ever. And they're all talking like the past of hip hop and how it was meant to inspire a community. It was meant to bring up social issues, meant to do all these things. And then you flip to the other side, and they're just like hip hop and like, nah, it ain't about like. I think the reaction was like, nah, it ain't about that shit. It's about the skeet and the skirt. When you go up on a girl, and you're like, ah, and Questlove's like, oh, you're talking about like the house culture and how it's about coming together. And it's like, what? I don't go to no parties because COVID-19. I just and like it's like these two like white boys that are like and then the skit ends with like, I listen to Fall Out Boys, Dad, come pick me up. And so I think like one of the things that they're trying to say is like when you don't know the history of it. And you don't and like it's something that I miss because I grew up in the 2000s to 2010s from a very conservative area. And I'll be honest, I politically was a Tea Partier. So I was not surrounding myself with a very diverse people group to talk to about stuff. And at the time, rap was just skeet, skeet, skeet like a water hose. It was just higher influx of dropping the N word. Like it just like it all of a sudden like it felt like it came out of nowhere. Everything was about sex. It was about bitches, cars, and all these things. And I just like got flown on to all of that stuff. But then someone showed me like, NWA and rap from the 90s and stuff like that. And I remember thinking like, oh, they're just angry all the time. And then you hear like early hip hop, it's like the hip hop, the hip hop, you don't stop, into the bang bang. I'm like, so how do we get from this to this to that? And then you miss that record execs literally realized that hip hop was causing riots because communities, particularly black and the white communities, were getting behind.
Do it, don't do it.
What?
I want to have this conversation. I saved that because
Okay,
I
well then,
yes,
how about I
I
set it-
still
how about
want
I
to
set it up?
yeah,
Can
I want to have that one in depth, and you're about to blow the lid off.
Okay. Well, then I'll just set it up then. And you missed the fact that record execs in the early 2000s straight up looked at hip hop and rap, realized, and the same, I'll blow it more. Same thing was happening to Martin Luther King before they shot him. They realized, oh crap, the black music that's inspiring social change, the white kids are getting behind it. And so a bunch of record execs literally went, all right, we're gonna take rap and make it about sex, drug, car, and hedonism. And then all of a sudden, like overnight, the genre changed. And so now you have all these like SoundCloud rappers that are 18 years old growing up on those artists that like Lil Wayne, fantastic lyricist, great at rhythm, singing about lollipops and whatever that means, and doing kind of those nonsense rap things and all this other stuff. And so you have like, I don't want to knock Lil Wayne, but when you came from like Ice Cube and stuff like that, what those guys were doing was straight out of Compton, like that scene to just what rap became, and you miss like what its actual history. And so you think like, that's why you get some people like, we had those friends at Liberty. It's like, oh, rap and hip hop is all about partying. It's all about the drugs. It's all about the sex. It's all about that. And you're like, no, it's not. So like, whenever I would want to either like have a friend that was trying to put something into like a hip hop in their worships, it's like, we don't want to give the wrong party vibe for church. It's like, rap and hip hop is social justice. That's what it was started as. That's what it's supposed to be. And some rich dudes made it something else. And so that to me is when we have true appropriation, when like we're not influenced by it. We're trying to change its original core message, and we're trying to do something different. So I'm sorry for blowing the lid on it, but it's just one of those that like,
No,
that
but
to me is like important because it not only appropriated and changed the message, it kind of ruined the culture. And it helped stigmatize like the way the conservative whites viewed the black society, because they're looking at guys like Christian artists like KJ52, who's rapping about like how much he loves Jesus and stuff like that. And you got like, well, we can't do stuff like that because the music KJ52 is listening to is like this stuff, and that's horrible. And he's listening off guys like, early Flavor Flav, early Jay-Z and all this other stuff like that. And you're like, I don't know. It's fascinating to me, that conversation, because like my community is not ready to have the ramifications of the stereotype we put on because someone literally changed it behind the scenes. And then you bring it up with people, they're like, oh no, that can't be it. They're always like that. It's like, wait, are you saying they've always been violent like that? Because that's racist. No, that's not what I'm saying. Yes, that's what you're saying. As you can tell, this is one of my favorite conversations because I'm a big history buff, and I'm a big history buff about my instrument, my drum set. And it's just always frustrating to me when people look at my students and my students of color and tell them, oh, don't listen to that kind of music, it will like do this to you. Or having a choir director being told, oh, we can't play hip hop because the black students can't tell the difference between good hip hop and wholesome hip hop and bad hip hop. And I'm like, yo, that is not even disguised racist. That's just, and in a genre written about social change where you can make things like Hamilton, put 98 million words into a minute of just giant things and make super emotional, complex stuff. But I digress. So there's my
I gotta close it, especially before you take that whole conversation. but
I'm
no,
so sorry, man.
no, you're good. We're still gonna have it because it's deeper than even that. But again, thank you so much, David, for coming on and having this conversation with me. I really
Anytime,
appreciate
man.
it. I ran over. I didn't mean to. But I'm gonna close this out in prayer real quick, and then I'm gonna let y'all go. Thank you, God, again for this platform and this conversation. This was a great one with a lot of information. So I pray that whoever has been able to hear this, whoever hears in the future, right? Amen.
Amen.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming out and spending some time with us and listening. I hope you learned.